Hey team, it's not uncommon that when you're looking at a business to acquire, you come across a business that you like or you love, you want to move forward with it, but it has like one sort of material outsized risk that just sort of like throws the whole thing off balance for you. The broker doesn't know what to think of it. You're not sure how to categorize it or how to think about it or how to approach it. In this video, I am going to share with you what I call the weighted average valuation technique that I've used over the last couple of decades in order to approach these kinds of issues and move forward to getting a deal done in a fair way and manage that risk. My name is Walker Dybel. I am the Wall Street Journal bestselling author of Buy Then Build, creator of Acquisition Lab. I've acquired over 10 companies outright over the last 2 decades. I've been inside over 100 deals. And today we're gonna, address this one little problem. So here's the thing, let's start here. I was working with a potential seller, okay? As a broker, I'm helping them think about go to market and all the rest of it. And what happened was, they had just call it a little over, slightly over $2 million in earnings, okay? And because of that, they thought that they would have this sort of, maybe, 4 to 5x, kind of, multiple on the business. But as I dug in, I saw a problem, right? And the problem was they had about $650,000, okay, of earnings it was in the same LLC. It was in a related product, but the problem was it was a different product. It was, the value proposition was different. It was to a separate customer base than the rest of their business. And to make it worse, they had one customer, okay? So what they really had was 2 businesses, okay? So, this was about $1.4 million, okay, in terms of earnings of their main business. And then they had this other sort of product line value proposition. I think they maybe even had a different customer service person on this business. But the point was, at first it looked like it was over 2 million, but then there's a significant, sort of like off balance thing happening, right? So I explained to them, like, look, here's the deal. This right here, this is a business doing, $1.4 million in earnings. And just based on, my research and my looking into the business and the trends and all the things that I know in my brain and all my brilliance, I said, look, this business is probably going to sell between a 4 and a 4.8 times, including working capital, okay? But this business down here, this is probably going to sell between like a 1 to 2 times, right? Depending on, whether it's cash at close, deferred payments, whatever it is. And so it was through that they began to understand that they had 2 different things and that needed to be valued differently. And they ultimately went and split them out into their own LLCs for this exact reason, so they could sell in the future, which was brilliant. Now, here's the thing. That exercise is pretty cut and dry, right? It's pretty easy to look in and be like, hey, what's going on here? A lot of times in business, when you're searching for a business, it's not that obvious, right? It might be something different. Like, it might just be like customer concentration, okay? Like, you've got one customer that's like an outsized, percentage of the revenue. Like, I had a member in the acquisition lab who was working through they were struggling with like how to work this out with the seller and how to make an offer. And I think they had one customer that was like, let's just say a third of the revenue, okay? So it was like 33% of revenue or so. And, they were like, look, I like the business. It's just this whole problem, with this one thing. And I'm trying to figure out how do I get this done? So what we decided on that call, was, here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at this and let's just say it was a $3 million earnings business for ease. Okay. So we're going to take the first 2 million and then we're going to separate out that one customer, which is 1 million. Okay. Then what we're going to do is, this 2 million, we're going to identify that is the business. That's the normal operating business with all the normal associated challenges, upside, risks, and all the rest of it. And then we're going to break off this one customer, okay, as a completely separate kind of issue that we're going to deal with. And we're going to value them differently, okay? And so as a result, I'm going to make up some hypothetical numbers here. We decided that this $2 million thing was worth, $6 million. And then this $1 million thing, here's what we did. We said, look, I'm going to buy your business 100% cash at closing, okay? But this customer is not dependable as a business, okay? So rather than, value this at a 1x or a 2x and just argue back and forth or whatever, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna treat it almost like an agency model where we're gonna say, okay, as long as this customer comes in with revenue, we are going to split the earnings with you, right? And so it's a pretty high margin business, I recall. And so it was one of these where, 15% of revenue would still be going to the seller for a period of, I think, 2 years. We decided on, or we gave them the option, or we'll pay you, 3% of revenue forever. Okay, and that was sort of the position that we took, right, in terms of which one do you want. And by the way, whenever you do an earnout or any future payments like that, please always peg it to revenue, even though it might be gross margin or it might be SDE or it might be earnings of some kind. You always want to peg it to revenue because revenue is easy to track, and no one can accuse you of mismanagement or bad decisions or not spending enough ad spend or spending too much ad spend or whatever it might be. Okay, so it removes any of the management risk. And so basically management risk claims, I should say. So basically, she went to them and said, look, I'm going to give you $6 million for this company, and then this part we're just going to pay you out separately, right? When I bought my B2B distribution company, it was kind of a similar situation. We had one customer that was, maybe between 20 and 25% of revenue. It was significant, okay? But at the end of the day, this exact exercise was not being run. Instead, it just sort of gave downward pressure onto the business valuation itself, okay? I believe I paid like a 2.7 or 2.8 times earnings on that deal. And the reason that I was comfortable with it, and I didn't meet the customer before closing, I didn't do any of these things, okay? The reason I was comfortable with it was because you could look at it and sort of say, okay, one, the customer had been with the company since the 80s, right? So it was like decades of history, right? Two, and perhaps more importantly, if they were to try to replace what we were doing for them, it would be kind of like a death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of situation. Every single little thing we were doing for them was low value, but we did such a high volume of it that, like, as an event, it became 25% of this little business in the state of Missouri or whatever, right? So it's one of these where combined it made a lot of sense, but individually the odds that they were going to leave the company anytime soon were like approaching zero. I felt safe, but it was ultimately a similar sort of academic exercise was happening. It was just sort of in the background in terms of the downward valuation pressure that was applied. Unfortunately, both at the time of when I acquired and when I sold, because maybe I sold for 2.8 times or something. I wasn't able to outgrow that customer concentration despite my efforts. They ended up growing through acquisition and doubling while I owned the company. So even though I made progress, they were still, I think they were even up to like 26% of revenue by the time I sold. Anyway, so the point is, using this, weighted average, valuation technique. So basically, in this case, it was just 6 million plus. In the other example, it was sort of like I don't know, 4.5 million, times 750,000 or something like that, right? So 5.2 million in total, right? But that 5.2 million would be based on about $2 million in earnings, right? So it starts to bring down what the multiple is for the overall earnings amount, okay? And that's what makes it a weighted average valuation. So in other words, this is what I want you to do. It's 4 steps. 1, isolate the material risk that it is that has you hung up, okay? Break it out and just sort of acknowledge that the rest of it is a business, okay? And that's the business part that you're buying, right? So just value it as, like at market value in terms of this is the business I'm buying. Then treat that other thing separately and say, like, look, this is going to have 1.5 to 2.5 or whatever number you come up with multiple on it. to adjust to account for exactly what this is, right? So in the case of my B2B business with decades of revenue and like really difficult to leave, very sticky product and all the rest of it, probably a 2x would have been appropriate. Something like this with one customer, a totally different situation, maybe as low as a 1x would make sense in that deal, especially if you're buying the other, the other 1.4 million in earnings at a proud valuation, right? It just makes it easy. So the point is this: isolate it, value each of them separately. Okay. Then what happens is when you add them together, you come up with your total amount, right? But you have to do a weighted average to come up with what the multiple is. Okay. And that multiple will ultimately tell you, that's, step 4 is sort of like your gut check, right? So it's sort of like, can I go back to them and really sort of say like, look, I'm going to buy your, $2 million earnings business for 5.2 million bucks, yes or no? In that particular case, it makes sense, right? It's logical when you break it down, but you want to make sure that you're not taking out something that like is just like a multiple that's so low that's not going to make any sense, right? So you have to do the gut check on, is this a fair deal for all involved? In other words, are they going to accept it? Okay. If you are looking for a business, if you're going to acquire a business in the next like 1 to 24 months, this is why I built Acquisition Lab. Me and our team has worked on this for 4 years. It's the only vetted community out there, truly vetted community. About 30% of applicants are accepted, extended offer to enroll. We anchored in world-class education. We have 14 advisors on staff with daily office hours and advisory hours. I run the search forum every 2 weeks, lifetime access, and we'll see you on the inside.